At 3:11 in the morning, I stood in the kitchen with our two screaming newborns, my postpartum stitches tearing with every step. My husband, Nolan Voss, just zipped his leather weekend bag and said, "I need to find myself." I thought it was cowardice. I did not know it was a dirty financial plan prepared before their birth. Nor did he know this exit would collapse the money, reputation, and future he built on my back. I am Alyssa Stone. I am 35 years old, living in a narrow duplex in Richmond, Virginia. The house used to smell like roasted coffee beans and fresh laundry. Tonight, it smells like sour milk, stale sweat, and medical-grade antiseptic. It has been less than 3 weeks since the surgeons cut me open to pull 2 human beings from my body. My physical form is not just unhealed, it feels violently broken. The thick surgical stitches pulling my skin together burn with a bright, hot agony every single time I shift my weight. My head is a heavy block of concrete, filled with a dense, suffocating fog born from relentless insomnia. I am the only one awake. I am the only one who has mastered the brutal, endless cycle of feeding, burping, and changing dirty diapers in the dead of the night. Right now. The noise in the hallway is entirely unmanageable. One baby is screaming directly into my left shoulder. Her tiny, frantic fingers are clawing at the damp fabric of my oversized shirt. The second baby is curled tightly in the crook of my right arm. His face is a dark, angry shade of red. He is letting out a sharp, continuous wail that feels like actual needles driving into my skull. My arms are visibly trembling from the sheer weight and the deep muscle fatigue. I pace the wooden floorboards. I bounce them gently. I whisper meaningless sounds into the dark. I'm doing everything I am supposed to do to survive the night. Nolan stands a few feet away. My husband is leaning heavily against the doorframe of the guest bedroom. He has both of his hands pressed flat and hard against his ears. His eyes are squeezed shut in dramatic frustration. "I cannot breathe in this house anymore," he says. The words are tight, pushed through his clenched teeth, loud enough to cut through the crying. I stop pacing for a fraction of a second. I stare at him through my burning eyes. I genuinely think he is just hitting a wall. We all hit the wall. The exhaustion makes you crazy. I assume he is going to walk out to the back patio. Maybe stand in the freezing winter air for 10 minutes to reset his shattered nerves. Instead, he turns around and walks straight toward the hall closet. He reaches up to the very top shelf. He grabs his heavy, expensive leather weekend bag. The sound of the thick brass zipper sliding open is aggressively loud in the small space. He carries the open bag into our bedroom. I follow him slowly, my body aching with every shuffle. The baby's still shrieking endlessly against my chest. I watch him open his wooden dresser drawers. He does not pull clothes out in a desperate, frantic frenzy. He folds them. He packs 3 crisp button-down shirts, 2 pairs of dark denim jeans, and a neat stack of wool socks. He moves with a sickeningly calm rhythm. He walks over to the small desk in the corner of the room. He unplugs his silver laptop, neatly wraps the white charging cord into a perfect circle, and slides both items into the padded back compartment of the leather bag. Then he opens the bottom drawer of the desk. He reaches in and pulls out his dark blue passport. Next to it, he picks up a thick, unmarked blue cardboard folder. My breath catches sharply in my throat. Why does he need a passport to take a walk? Why does he need a folder of documents? "Where are you going?" I ask. My voice cracks instantly. It sounds weak, thin, and entirely desperate. Nolan stops moving. He drops the blue folder into the bag and pulls the brass zipper shut. He lifts the heavy leather strap over his right shoulder and finally turns to look at me. His face is entirely blank. The skin around his eyes is smooth and relaxed. There's absolutely no trace of the blind panic or the crushing fatigue that is currently drowning me. He looks well rested. He looks entirely detached from the reality of this room. "I need a few weeks to find myself," he says. His voice is perfectly level and devoid of warmth. "Before this life pulls me under." A few weeks. The words bounce around my exhausted brain, refusing to form a logical sentence. 2 infants are screaming for sustenance. I am bleeding through heavy maternity bandages, and he needs a few weeks to find himself. The specific detail that sends a wave of pure, paralyzing ice down my spine is not the packed bag. It is not even the passport. It is his gaze. He looks down at the 2 tiny, screaming human beings in my arms, and his facial expression does not shift a single millimeter. There is zero affection in his eyes. There is zero guilt. He looks at them as if they are a problem he never planned for and now wants removed from his life. They are not his flesh and blood. They are merely an obstacle. He walks past me. The rough leather of his bag brushes against my bare shoulder. He heads straight down the hallway for the front door. He does not look back. He does not kiss me. He does not touch the heads of his children. He wraps his hand around the cold brass knob. He pulls the heavy wooden door open. The sharp, freezing night air rushes into the entryway, stinging my tired eyes. Before he steps over the threshold into the dark, he pauses. He turns his head just an inch. "Do not make things worse than they need to be," he says. It is not a plea for understanding. It is not a promise to return when he feels better. It is a direct, calculated, and toxic warning. He steps outside. The door closes. The metal deadbolt clicks firmly into place. For exactly half a second, the house is plunged into an absolute, suffocating silence. It is a terrible, terrifying vacuum of sound. Then, as if realizing the sudden drop in temperature, both babies inhale sharply. Their cries shatter the air again, louder and vastly more desperate than before. The realization crashes into me, heavy and suffocating. I am completely alone. I have been abandoned in the absolute most fragile, vulnerable moment of my entire existence. I slide down the painted hallway wall, ignoring the searing pain ripping through my lower half, until I hit the cold floorboards. I sit there in the dim yellow light, rocking the babies, whispering meaningless comforts into the empty house. Eventually, the crying stops. Pure exhaustion claims them both. I manage to stand up, my knees shaking violently under my own weight, and lay them down in the double bassinet in the living room. I need to wash the plastic bottles. I need to prepare the next feed. I remember we only have 1 single scoop of the specialized formula left. The pediatrician was very clear about not switching brands and risking their stomachs. I need to order an emergency delivery from the 24-hour pharmacy service immediately. I pull my phone out of my pocket. My eyes burn fiercely against the bright white screen. I open the delivery application, add 4 cans of the formula to the digital cart, and proceed to the checkout screen. The payment method is linked directly to our joint bank card, the account that holds our life savings, our bill money, and my upcoming maternity leave deposits. I press the submit button. A red banner drops down from the top of the screen. Transaction declined. I blink slowly. My damaged brain cannot process the words. I tap the submit button a second time. Transaction declined. Insufficient funds. A cold sweat breaks out on the back of my neck. I close the delivery application. I open my mobile banking application. I type in my secure password with trembling thumbs. The loading circle spins for 3 agonizing seconds. The financial dashboard appears on the screen. Joint checking account balance, $0.00. Joint savings account balance, $0.00. I stare blindly at the numbers. I swipe down to refresh the page. The numbers remain exactly the same. The heavy fog in my head violently clears away, replaced instantly by a razor-sharp, terrifying reality. Nolan did not run away because the crying was simply too loud. He did not leave because he was suddenly overwhelmed by fatherhood. You do not accidentally empty 2 joint bank accounts in a moment of panic. You do not accidentally pack financial folders and a passport for a mental health walk. He had orchestrated this perfectly. He had planned his escape while I was heavily pregnant, while I was risking my own life on a cold operating table to bring his children into the world. He was quietly transferring our funds. He did not just walk out the front door. He systematically dismantled our entire life, packed the valuable pieces into a leather weekend bag, and left me standing in the wreckage. He had set the battlefield exactly how he wanted it, and the war had already begun. For the first 72 hours, the concept of daylight and darkness completely dissolved. My world shrank entirely to the square footage of the living room and the kitchen. There was no morning, no afternoon, and no evening. There was only the low, mechanical hum of the digital bottle warmer sitting on the granite counter, the sharp, stinging smell of the medical-grade antiseptic I sprayed on my torn skin, and the terrifying, raspy wheezing of newborn lungs fighting to regulate in the cold air. Every single time I closed my burning eyes, a violent jolt of pure adrenaline ripped me awake. The fear of sleeping too deeply became an actual, physical weight sitting directly on my chest. If I slept, they might stop breathing. If I slept, I might drop them onto the hardwood floor. If I slept, the crushing reality of my empty, echoing house would finally swallow me whole. I existed in a dangerous state of suspended animation, powered entirely by primal maternal instinct and glasses of tap water. The duplex I live in belonged to my late aunt. It is a sturdy, brick building split into 2 separate units. I occupy the top floor. On the evening of the second day, a sharp knock rattled the wood of my front door. It was not a hesitant, polite tap. It was a firm, deliberate strike. I dragged my aching body down the narrow hallway, clutching a stained burp cloth in my right hand. Standing on the porch was Selena Ward. She lives in the bottom unit. She is 29 years old, works over 50 hours a week as a corporate paralegal, and usually keeps entirely to herself. Tonight, however, she was holding a massive aluminum pot of steaming chicken soup in one hand and a bulk cardboard box of newborn diapers in the other. "I can hear them crying through the heating vents," Selena said. She did not wait for an invitation to enter. She stepped right past me, walked directly into the kitchen, set the heavy pot onto the cold stove, and dropped the box of diapers onto the living room rug. "You look like a walking corpse," she continued, rolling up the sleeves of her gray sweater. "Go into your bedroom, lock the door, and sleep for exactly 2 hours. I will not let them die." I wanted to protest, to maintain some pathetic illusion of control, but my knees literally buckled beneath my weight. I handed her the feeding chart without a single word and collapsed into my unmade bed. Those 2 hours of dreamless, heavy unconsciousness were the only reason my heart kept beating. When I finally woke up, My brain had accumulated enough oxygen to start processing the immediate, terrifying logistics of our survival. I needed to replenish our dwindling supplies. I opened my laptop on the kitchen island to check our automatic delivery accounts. The screen loaded slowly. The premium diaper service we had set up 2 months ago was entirely gone from the dashboard. I clicked into the account history. Cancelled. The status had been manually changed 4 days before he walked out the door. I opened the grocery delivery application to see our weekly staple order. Paused indefinitely. I logged into the municipal utility portal to make sure the winter heating bill was paid. The automatic payment feature, which was linked to his personal credit card, had been completely removed the previous week. He had not simply fled from a stressful night of crying babies. He had meticulously walked through our digital life and severed every single lifeline, ensuring I would hit the concrete the moment he let go. He had cleared the path for a perfectly clean, untraceable retreat. The panic began to simmer deep in my gut, turning my stomach into a tight knot. I opened a new tab and checked my email for the direct deposit notification from my employer, Northgate Benefit Systems. My maternity leave pay was scheduled to hit my checking account on the second Friday of the month. It was now late Saturday. There was no notification email. There was no pending deposit. At first, my sleep-deprived brain tried to rationalize it. It is just a corporate payroll glitch. The Human Resources Department made a clerical error. But the cold, heavy stone of dread sitting in my stomach told me otherwise. I walked over to the kitchen counter and stared down at the messy pile of unopened mail I had ignored for weeks. I began tearing open the white envelopes with shaking fingers. Past due bills, brightly colored junk mail, a thick clothing catalog. Then, a stark white envelope from the local credit union caught my eye. I slid my thumb under the paper flap, tearing it open, and pulled out a formal, multi-page document. It was a statement for a massive home equity line of credit, a loan secured directly against the very walls of the duplex my aunt had left me. The total balance printed in bold black ink was staggering. I read the name listed on the primary account. It was my name. My signature was legally required for this, but I had never stepped foot inside that local credit union. I had never requested a loan. I had never signed a single one of these papers. My chest tightened so fiercely, I genuinely thought my ribs would snap under the pressure. I grabbed my phone from the counter. I opened his contact profile. My thumb hovered directly over the green call button. I wanted to scream at him until my throat bled. I wanted to demand answers. I wanted to beg him to come back and fix the financial nightmare he had unleashed on his own family. Then, a soft, high-pitched whimper drifted from the living room. I looked over the edge of the kitchen island. The twins were sleeping in their double bassinet, their tiny, fragile chests rising and falling in perfect unison. They were completely oblivious to the fact that their own father had secretly sold the roof over their heads before they were even old enough to open their eyes. I slowly lowered the phone. I am not going to beg a man who stepped over the threshold of this house with a packed bag so easily. Selena walked into the kitchen, wiping her hands carefully on a paper towel. She took one long look at the expression on my face and the crumpled bank statement clutched tightly in my fist. She poured me a tall glass of cold water and slid it across the marble island. "Do not do it," Selena said. Her voice was flat, entirely devoid of the useless, sugary pity most people offer in a crisis. Do not call him. Do not cry to him. Panic is the absolute greatest gift you can give to a coward who prepared his exit strategy in advance. Do not give him the satisfaction of knowing his trap worked. She was right. He wanted me hysterical. He wanted me completely unhinged, exhausted, and drowning in the mess he left behind, so I would surrender to whatever terms he demanded later. On the evening of the third day, the final shred of my morning burned away entirely. I was sitting on the very edge of the sofa, nursing both babies simultaneously, mindlessly scrolling through a social media application to keep myself awake. The digital algorithm suddenly pushed his face right onto my screen. It was a new story update. He was in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The photograph was framed perfectly. Golden hour sunlight spilled beautifully across a rustic wooden table. A steaming cup of expensive, artisanal pour-over coffee sat right next to a leather-bound journal. He looked tanned, relaxed, and entirely unbothered by the trail of destruction he had orchestrated. Beneath the picturesque image, he had typed a short philosophical caption: "Finding the necessary silence to heal the soul. Sometimes you have to step away from the noise to remember who you are." I read the exact words 3 times. Healing the soul. The noise. I looked down at the painful physical scars hidden beneath my clothes. The stack of fraudulent loan documents sitting on my kitchen counter. And the 2 innocent human lives he had discarded like old tax receipts. Something inside my chest snapped. It was a clean, incredibly quiet break. The crushing, suffocating agony that had paralyzed me for the last 72 hours evaporated completely into the thin air. It was instantly replaced by something far more dangerous. The pain turned to absolute ice. It froze my tears right in the corners of my eyes. It steadied my violently shaking hands. He thought I was just a tired, broken mother who would eventually fold under the immense pressure and sign whatever papers he demanded just to make the pain stop. He was wrong. The mourning period was over. The war had just begun, and he had severely underestimated the woman he left behind. The digital glow of the laptop screen cast a harsh, blue light across the dark kitchen island. The house was entirely silent, save for the rhythmic breathing of the infants in the next room. I opened a secure browser window and navigated directly to the Northgate Benefit Systems employee portal. I needed to understand why my maternity leave compensation had vanished into thin air. I typed my corporate credentials into the login screen. My fingers moved mechanically over the keyboard. The dashboard loaded, displaying my official employment profile. I clicked on the Compensation and Leave tab, fully expecting to see a system error regarding my temporary disability payout. Instead, a bright green banner stretched across the top of the screen. The system listed my current status as active. It explicitly stated that I had voluntarily returned to work the previous week. I stared at the glowing letters until they blurred. The previous week, I was sitting in a sterile examination room, wearing a thin paper gown, while a medical specialist inspected the deep surgical wounds across my abdomen. I was physically incapable of standing upright for more than 20 minutes, let alone commuting to a corporate office to analyze compliance data. Someone had deliberately accessed the Human Resources portal, bypassed the security questions, and submitted a forged return to work authorization form using my employee identification number. By telling the company I was back at my desk, the system automatically terminated my paid leave. But because I was not actually clocking any billable hours, no paycheck was generated. My income was completely severed. I closed the employment portal. My breathing became dangerously shallow. I opened my banking application again. But this time, I did not just look at the empty balances. I downloaded the detailed transaction ledger for our joint savings account, exporting the data into a raw spreadsheet to analyze the history line by line. I expected to see one massive, devastating withdrawal. That is what amateur thieves do. But Nolan was not an amateur. If he had moved a massive sum of money at once, the bank's security algorithm would have triggered an automatic fraud alert to my mobile phone. Instead, he had executed a slow, methodical bleed. I scrolled down the endless rows of data. $350 transferred to an external account on a Tuesday. $500 withdrawn at a local automated teller machine on a Thursday. $820 categorized vaguely as a business expense the following Monday. He had been draining our life savings for over 5 months, while I was painting the nursery, researching pediatricians, and buying tiny cotton socks. He was quietly siphoning the foundation of our family into an invisible bucket. The betrayal was not a sudden explosion. It was a calculated, daily decision to rob his own children. I pushed the laptop slightly away and pulled the thick credit union envelope toward me under the kitchen pendant light. It was the home equity line of credit statement I had found earlier. I forced myself to read the fine print, scanning the legal jargon until I reached the final execution page. There, printed in stark black ink, was a digital signature bearing my full legal name. I checked the execution timestamp printed directly beneath the forged signature. The document was electronically signed and notarized exactly 2 weeks and 3 days before the babies were born. I opened a new browser tab and logged into my hospital patient portal. I pulled up my admission records for that exact month. I matched the dates. I matched the exact hour. A wave of pure, absolute nausea washed over me. On the precise day and hour that this loan document was digitally signed from our home internet protocol address, I was lying flat on my back in a hospital triage bed. I was hooked to an electronic fetal monitor, terrified out of my mind, being treated for threatened preterm labor. I had been heavily medicated to stop the contractions. I was physically and legally incapacitated. I could not have signed that document. He knew I was in the hospital fighting to keep our children alive, and he used that exact window of distraction to forge my signature and mortgage the roof over my head. I look back at the loan statement to trace the destination of the funds. The entire disbursement, a massive 6-figure sum, had not gone into any of our known accounts. It had been wired directly into a corporate banking account registered to a limited liability company called Juniper Hollow Ventures. I had never heard of Juniper Hollow Ventures in my entire life. It sounded perfectly polished, just rustic and modern enough to look incredibly attractive on a venture capital portfolio. I minimized the browser and opened the shared cloud storage drive we used for household documents and tax returns. He had meticulously wiped the primary folders clean before he packed his leather bag. But his arrogance had left a blind spot. He had forgotten to clear the archived synchronization folder linked to his old desktop computer. I dug through the digital graveyard of old files until I found a buried subfolder labeled with a recent date. Inside, there was a large presentation file. It was an unfinished pitch deck. I clicked it open. The first slide loaded, revealing a sleek minimalist logo. It was a comprehensive business proposal for a premium men's health and wellness brand. I scrolled through page after page of aggressive market analysis, elegant supplement bottle designs, and projected revenue streams aimed at selling a polished version of male self-improvement. Then, I reached the financial requirements slide. The initial startup capital requested to launch the brand was listed in bold font. I looked at the number. Then I looked at the loan statement sitting on my kitchen counter. The capital requested in the presentation matched the exact dollar amount stolen from my duplex down to the very last cent. He had not ruined our lives in a moment of panic. He had systematically stolen the equity from my family home to fund a vanity startup project about men's wellness. I kept digging. The adrenaline in my bloodstream was burning hot and bright, sharpening my focus into a deadly point. At the very bottom of the archived folder, there was a backup file containing exported communications. I used the search function to filter for the name of his older brother, a man who had always covered for his worst impulses. I found an email thread dated just 5 days before the twins were born. I clicked on the final message Nolan had sent. The text was incredibly brief. I just need 6 weeks of quiet before the funding round officially closes. The email read, "After that, she will be totally out of options. She will have to sign whatever I put in front of her." I sat perfectly still in the dark kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator suddenly sounded deafening. The digital clock on the oven read 4:15 in the morning. Every single piece of the puzzle violently snapped into place, forming a picture so utterly grotesque it stole the breath straight from my lungs. This was never a story about a broken marriage. This was never about a man who became overwhelmed by the terrifying pressure of sudden fatherhood. He needed 6 weeks. He needed 6 weeks for his stolen venture capital to clear the banking hurdles and lock into his new corporate entity. He knew that during those 6 weeks, I would be entirely consumed by the brutal, exhausting reality of keeping 2 premature infants alive. He engineered my financial ruin. He cut off my maternity pay, drained my savings, and attached a massive fraudulent debt to my property so that when he finally returned, I would be completely destitute. He calculated that my exhaustion and poverty would force me to sign the duplex over to him entirely just to survive. He did not walk out to find himself. He walked out to execute a hostile corporate takeover of my life. The fear that had been paralyzing me for days vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. He thought I was just a casualty on his balance sheet. He was about to learn what happens when a woman with nothing left to lose stops being afraid. For the last decade, I have built a lucrative career as a senior compliance analyst. My entire professional existence revolves around forensic audits, digital timestamps, electronic record keeping, and hunting down the microscopic loopholes in corporate paperwork. Before the physical trauma of childbirth shattered my focus, I was the person executives genuinely feared when the quarterly numbers did not perfectly align, sitting at that kitchen island, staring at the hard evidence of my ruined life. The thick fog of postpartum despair finally lifted. It was instantly replaced by a cold, hard muscle memory, my professional skills, dormant since the surgery, activated like a primal survival instinct. This was no longer a personal tragedy. It was a hostile financial audit. And I was officially back on the clock. By 7 o'clock in the morning, I was on the telephone. I did not call my mother to cry about my broken marriage. I called a completely different national banking institution. I opened a brand new, single-signatory checking account under my legal maiden name. I navigated back to the corporate employee portal. I bypassed the altered return to work form and went straight to the payroll routing settings. I deleted the compromised joint account and redirected 100% of my future corporate salary into the new, secure vault. Next, I contacted all 3 major credit bureaus. I placed a hard security freeze on my personal Social Security number to absolutely stop him from opening any new lines of credit. And I ordered a comprehensive, lifetime credit report to see exactly how deep the financial rot truly went. Later that afternoon, Selena came upstairs to drop off more clean towels. I told her exactly what I had found in the digital archives. She did not gasp in shock. She simply pulled out her cellular phone and made one phone call. 2 hours later, I was sitting across my dining room table from Camilla Dane, Camilla is a high-powered family law attorney who charges an extortionate hourly rate, which Selena had somehow convinced her to defer for the initial consultation. Camilla wore a sharp black blazer and possessed dark eyes that could cut through solid steel. She did not offer me a warm hug. She did not tilt her head and tell me that everything would be okay. I would have fired her on the absolute spot if she had. Instead, she unclasped her heavy leather briefcase, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and outlined exactly what we needed to accomplish within the next 24 hours. "We have 3 immediate lines of counterattack," Camilla said, her voice brisk and entirely void of useless emotion. "First, we are filing an emergency ex parte motion for the temporary exclusive use and possession of this duplex." He packed a bag and established a new temporary residence. "We are locking him out legally, so he cannot waltz back in here and claim he never left the marital home. Second, we are building an aggressive case for the dissipation of marital assets. Every single dollar he siphoned out of your joint accounts to fund his vanity project is money he stole directly from the marital estate. We will force the family court judge to offset his share of whatever equity is left. Third, and absolutely most importantly, we are drafting a formal fraud affidavit regarding the forged electronic signature on the home equity line of credit." I nodded slowly, absorbing the brutal strategy. If Camilla was the general of this war, I was the lead corporate investigator. I walked into my home office and found a massive, thick black binder I normally used for complex tax returns. I repurposed it entirely. It became the physical, heavy manifestation of my retaliation. I created heavily tabbed sections using thick plastic dividers. The first section was the daily physical log. I meticulously recorded every single feeding time, every diaper change, every ounce of consumed milk, and every fleeting hour of sleep. The second section was strictly financial. I filed the hospital bills, the pharmacy receipts, the utility statements, and even printed out color photographs of the physical electric meter to prove I was the only adult managing the household infrastructure. The third section was dedicated to digital evidence. I used a 3-hole punch on every single ignored text message, every printed screenshot of his pathetic, pseudo-spiritual vacation updates, and crisp, high-resolution copies of the intercepted emails about his venture capital timeline. I turned my trauma into a perfectly indexed database. However, I knew that simply printing a screenshot of the Human Resources portal showing my forged return to work status would not hold up to intense legal scrutiny. A clever defense attorney could easily claim I altered the image in a photo editing software. I needed raw, legally admissible data. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct extension of Jonah Pike. Jonah is a former colleague and a senior systems administrator in the internal technology department at my company. I explained the situation briefly, completely stripping away the emotional humiliation and presenting it strictly as a severe data breach of an employee account. Jonah immediately understood the gravity of an unauthorized access event. He did not pity me. He respected the protocol. He guided me through the exact corporate procedure to formally request the back-end server logs without triggering a messy internal investigation that could stall the process. I submitted the official legal ticket. I did not just want to show the family court that the form was submitted. I wanted the secure system logs to prove the exact time it was filed, the specific device address that submitted it, and the remote internet protocol location it originated from. I was building an ironclad chain of custody that no expensive lawyer could ever break. The following morning, I packed the twins into their heavy infant car seats for their crucial early-life pediatric checkup. We drove to the medical clinic in complete silence. In the brightly lit examination room, the pediatrician examined their weight and their tiny reflexes. She noted the dark circles under my eyes and asked how the support system was functioning at home. I did not lie to protect his fragile reputation. I stated the harsh facts clearly and concisely. I asked her to explicitly document in the official medical charting that the father was entirely absent from the household, was completely uncommunicative, and had missed every single critical medical appointment since their premature birth. The doctor paused, her pen hovering over the digital tablet, before nodding solemnly and typing my exact words into the permanent record. It might have seemed like a microscopic, petty detail to a casual outside observer, but in the cold, unforgiving arena of a custody battle, actual care records carry immense, devastating weight. A judge does not care about broken promises or theoretical parenting. A judge cares exclusively about the documented, verified medical history of infant survival. Every medical note was another brick in the wall I was building to lock him out of our lives. By the end of the day, I sat back down at the kitchen island and closed the heavy black binder. The thick metal rings snapped shut with a deeply satisfying, sharp click. I looked at the mountain of indexed evidence I had compiled in just a few short days. A profound, terrifying sense of peace washed over my exhausted body. I made a solemn, unbreakable vow to myself right there in the dim light of the silent house. I decided on my primary rule of survival for the remainder of this war. I will never scream at him. I will never send him a long, emotionally unhinged text message begging for an explanation or demanding closure. I will never waste a single precious breath arguing with him to vent my justified rage. Arguments are fleeting, messy, and incredibly easy for a narcissist to manipulate. Paper is permanent. Paper is perfectly cold. Paper does not blink under immense pressure. I will simply step back, maintain absolute, terrifying silence, and let the meticulously gathered documents speak entirely on my behalf. The financial trap he set for me was built entirely on the arrogant assumption that I would break under the weight of motherhood. He forgot who he married. I was not broken. I was weaponized. The digital thermometer flashed a harsh crimson light in the pitch-black nursery. 101.4 degrees. My newborn son was burning with his very first fever, his tiny chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. I sat completely motionless in the rocking chair at 2 o'clock in the morning, holding his bear, sweating skin against my own chest to help regulate his soaring temperature. In my other arm, his sister squirmed uncomfortably, picking up on the distress radiating through the room. My hair was matted. My eyes were burning from chronic sleep deprivation, and a terrifying mountain of fresh medical bills sat squarely on the kitchen island waiting for funds that simply did not exist. To keep myself awake while monitoring the fever, I opened a social media application on my phone. The algorithmic feed refreshed, and his face instantly filled the glowing screen. Nolan was miles away from the smell of infant acetaminophen and the crushing weight of utility shut-off notices. He was sitting cross-legged on a hand-woven rug in the middle of a stunning desert landscape. The photograph was perfectly filtered to highlight the golden hour sunlight hitting his face. In his right hand, he held a crystal glass filled with expensive, biodynamic wine. I scrolled to his next update. It was a brief audio clip from a new independent podcast he had apparently recorded that afternoon. The title of the episode was perfectly tailored for an audience seeking shallow enlightenment. It was called The Art of Radical Honesty. I pressed play. His deep, soothing voice floated quietly out of the phone speaker, pontificating about the profound courage required to shed toxic environments and embrace an authentic, unburdened existence. He spoke passionately about the spiritual necessity of prioritizing your own inner peace. Even when the universe tries to anchor you to the ground, he was monetizing his abandonment. He was spinning his cowardly escape into a profound spiritual journey for internet applause. The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy of a man preaching radical honesty while secretly forging his wife's signature on fraudulent bank loans made my stomach physically churn. While he curated this enlightened persona online, he was spinning an entirely different narrative to our shared social circle. I soon discovered exactly what he was telling our families. His mother called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I answered the phone, foolishly expecting a grandmother inquiring about the terrifying health scares of her premature grandchildren. "Alyssa, you need to lower your defenses and look at the bigger picture," his mother said. Her voice was dripping with a thick, patronizing sweetness. "Nolan told me how erratic and difficult you have been lately. He said your postpartum stress was making the house incredibly hostile. You cannot destroy your family over a man's impulsive decision to take a breather. He just needed to step back so things could cool down. Give him space, and he will come to his senses." I sat frozen on the edge of the sofa. She did not ask if the babies were breathing normally. She did not ask how I was feeding them. She called to deliver a masterclass in gaslighting, perfectly engineered by her son. He had painted himself as the patient, exhausted husband fleeing a hysterical, hormonally unhinged wife. He had provided a socially acceptable excuse for his absence, and his family swallowed it whole. For a terrible, fleeting hour, I almost fell into that suffocating trap of maternal guilt. I looked around the messy house, the stacks of laundry, the sterile medical supplies, and wondered if I really had pushed him away. Was I too focused on the babies? Was I too harsh when he complained about the noise? The insidious nature of emotional manipulation is that it forces you to interrogate your own sanity while the architect of your misery walks away clean. I needed to clear my head. I put the babies in their double swing, fired up my laptop, and went back into the deepest layers of our shared cloud storage drive. I needed concrete data to anchor me to reality. I bypassed the folders I had already searched and started running keyword queries through the archived system files. That is when I found the hidden spreadsheet. The file was innocuously titled Runway. I opened it. It was not a work document for his previous employer. It was an intricate, highly detailed financial roadmap for his departure. I stared at the rows and columns, the blood turning to absolute ice in my veins. He had categorized everything with sickening precision. Row 12 listed the exact cost of a first-class airplane ticket. Row 15 detailed a line item of $4,500 allocated for a short-term luxury loft rental in the Southwest. Row 22 set aside $800 specifically designated for entertaining potential corporate investors with expensive dinners. He had charted his financial burn rate for the first 6 months of his new life. But the detail that completely shattered any lingering illusion of his impulsive behavior was buried in the timeline section on the second tab of the document. He had mapped out specific project milestones. One of the highlighted cells read, "Execute physical departure from marital home after babies stabilize." I looked at the creation metadata of the file. The spreadsheet was authored, saved, and meticulously updated a full 6 weeks before my water broke prematurely. Nolan did not flee the house because the crying suddenly broke his spirit. He did not leave because my postpartum anxiety created a hostile environment. He did not make an impulsive, panicked decision in the middle of a hard night. He had sat at this exact kitchen island, drinking coffee I brewed for him, and casually typed out a budget for his escape while I was heavily pregnant. He had calculated exactly how much money he needed to steal from me to survive his transition. He was not a victim of sudden marital stress. He was a corporate sniper, and he had pulled the trigger exactly on schedule. I picked up my phone and called Camilla Dane immediately. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I read the exact contents of the spreadsheet to her, including the creation dates and the budgeted line items. "Email that raw file to my secure server right now," Camilla ordered, her voice completely devoid of hesitation. "He is utilizing the stolen equity from your house to fund his investor runway. We are cutting off his air supply." Within 3 hours, Camilla drafted and filed an aggressive legal mechanism directly with the county recorder's office. It was a formal notice of pending litigation, firmly attaching a massive legal flag to the title of my duplex. This brilliant maneuver created an impenetrable blockade. It completely prevented Nolan from attempting to secretly transfer the property deed, and it absolutely barred him from attempting to extract even a single dollar more of fraudulent debt against the house without my explicit, court-ordered knowledge. We locked the vault from the outside. I closed the laptop and walked back into the nursery. The fever had finally broken. The babies were sleeping peacefully in the dim light. I looked down at them, and I felt a profound, tectonic shift occurring deep inside my own mind. I opened the social media application one more time. I looked at the photograph of his desert meditation and his expensive wine. Just a few days ago, seeing his face would have sent me into a violent spiral of grief and rejection. I would have cried over the sheer cruelty of it all. I did not shed a single tear now. The wound had completely closed over. I stopped viewing his arrogant stories and his hypocritical podcasts as personal attacks meant to hurt my feelings. I now viewed them through the cold, calculated lens of a forensic auditor. Every photograph was time-stamped evidence of him squandering stolen marital assets. Every podcast episode bragging about his newfound freedom was a recorded admission of his willful abandonment. Every boastful caption about his upcoming business ventures was a roadmap proving his hidden financial motives. He thought he was broadcasting his triumphant rebirth to the world. He had no idea he was eagerly handing the prosecution a perfectly documented confession. I took a high-resolution screenshot of the desert photograph, filed it neatly into the digital evidence folder, and went to wash the empty baby bottles. As the agonizing weeks slowly passed, the chaotic, suffocating blur of basic survival finally began to give way to a hardened, meticulous rhythm. I stopped fighting the grueling, relentless demands of twin infancy and instead engineered a flawless system to conquer it. My physical body was still healing, but my mind was sharpening back into a lethal instrument. The wide granite kitchen counter transformed entirely from a domestic culinary space into a highly organized, at-home medical triage station. I taped thick, laminated feeding charts directly to the stainless steel refrigerator door, tracking every single consumed ounce of specialized formula, every diaper change, and every vitamin drop with the cold. Exact precision of a clinical trial. I established strict, non-negotiable sleep schedules that I defended with my life. I built a dedicated, well-lit medical corner in the living room, stocking it systematically with infant pain relievers, digital thermometers, and sterile nasal aspirators perfectly lined up by size and frequency of use. I sterilized the plastic feeding bottles in massive, carefully timed batches, creating a rotating, endless inventory that ensured I was never caught unprepared. Even at 3 o'clock in the morning, I was no longer a panicked, weeping mother drowning in the dark of an empty house. I was a commanding officer managing a high-stakes, zero-margin logistical operation, and I was succeeding. Once the babies were medically stable and the relentless feeding routine became pure muscle memory, I opened my laptop for an entirely different purpose. I reached out directly to my senior manager at Northgate Benefit Systems, Mara Keene. I did not ask for my full salary back, nor did I request an arduous full-time corporate schedule that would inevitably break me. I firmly requested a limited remote project allocation of exactly 15 billable hours per week. I did not do this out of some burning, misguided corporate ambition. I did it because I desperately needed to feel the sharp, familiar edges of my own professional competence. I needed to interact with the adult world. I needed to remember that I was a highly skilled, fiercely intelligent professional, not just a discarded wife surviving entirely on sheer adrenaline and bitter spite. Mara is a hardened, brilliant corporate veteran who does not waste a single breath on useless, sugary pity. When I explained my newly modified availability and the strict boundaries of my time, she simply nodded through the video conferencing screen and immediately routed 3 complex, heavily coded compliance audits to my secure remote server. She offered maximum operational flexibility, allowing me to review dense legal documents at 4 a.m. while nursing a child on my lap, or during the brief, 45-minute windows of precious afternoon naps. Because of Mara's pragmatic, unsentimental support, I finally secured my own independent stream of income. It was completely clean money, untainted by his fraud, deposited directly into the brand new, single signatory checking account Nolan did not even know existed. Every single dollar I earned and saved felt like a thick, heavy brick being deliberately laid in the foundation of my new defensive fortress. With the arrival of my very first independent paycheck, I systematically fortified our physical environment. I hired a local security contractor to completely remove the standard brass front doorknob and replace it with a heavy-duty, digital keypad lock, entirely erasing Nolan's physical access to the property. I had the contractor install a high-definition doorbell camera system, syncing the encrypted live video feed directly to my cellular phone so I could monitor the exterior perimeter securely from the quiet of the nursery. Then, I tackled the guest bedroom where he had so casually packed his expensive leather bag. I stripped the bed linens, pushed the heavy furniture aggressively against the far walls, and dragged my solid oak desk right into the exact center of the room. I set up a dual-monitor workstation right next to a spacious double portable crib. I actively transformed the room of his cowardly departure into a heavily fortified command center. I surrounded myself with thick legal binders, printed compliance spreadsheets, and the quiet, steady breathing of my healthy children. The duplex was no longer a tragic crime scene of marital betrayal. It was my operational headquarters, and I was the absolute authority inside its walls. On a particularly cold Tuesday evening, a rare and absolute silence fell over the duplex. Both babies had miraculously fallen into a deep sleep at exactly 7 o'clock. I stood alone in the center of the kitchen and realized, for the very first time in nearly 8 weeks, I had 2 entirely free hands and an empty, growling stomach. I opened the oven and pulled out a heavy ceramic dish of baked pasta that Selena had brought up the previous day. I sat down at the wooden dining room table completely alone. I took a slow bite. The food was actually hot. It burned my tongue slightly, and it was the most magnificent sensation in the world. I chewed slowly, feeling the comforting warmth spread deep through my chest. I looked around the room. I saw the perfectly clean countertops, the glowing green light of the digital lock on the front door, and the thick, meticulously organized evidence binders stacked neatly on the living room shelf. In that tiny, quiet fragment of time, I realized I was not just bracing for the next impact anymore. I was genuinely rebuilding my life. I was breathing deeply. I was reviving, right as I swallowed the final, satisfying bite of my dinner. My cellular phone vibrated aggressively against the solid wood of the table. The incoming caller identification displayed the formal name of a prominent, highly reputable local title and escrow company. I wiped my mouth with a paper napkin and answered the call, my professional corporate persona instantly snapping firmly into place. "Good evening. This is Alyssa Stone," I said, my tone perfectly leveled. "Good evening, Ms. Stone. We are calling directly from the commercial escrow department to verbally verify your appointment for tomorrow afternoon to finalize the modified loan execution documents for the duplex property." A cheerful, highly polished female voice chirped through the tiny speaker. "Your husband, Mr. Voss, contacted our office this morning and requested an expedited closing schedule so the new venture capital funds can be released to his corporate account by Friday." My right hand tightened so fiercely around my glass of ice water, I thought the thick glass might actually shatter. A modified loan execution. He was not satisfied with the massive six-figure sum he had already stolen from my family. He was actively trying to leverage the property a second time, attempting to frantically close a secondary funding round to artificially inflate his new company's financial valuation right before he returned to play the role of the apologetic, refreshed husband. He genuinely thought I was still completely oblivious, blindly stumbling through the heavy fog of new motherhood, too thoroughly exhausted to notice a second fraudulent mortgage being quietly slipped under the door. "There's been a severe, actionable administrative error on your end," I told the escrow agent, my voice dropping instantly to a sharp, terrifyingly icy register. "I have absolutely not authorized any loan modifications. You are to immediately halt all processing on that specific file. I will be contacting your senior legal department within the hour with my representation." I hung up the phone without waiting for her stunned reply and immediately dialed Camilla Dane. It was past 8 o'clock at night, but Camilla answered the line on the second ring. I relayed the exact contents of the brief conversation word for absolute word. "He is getting dangerously desperate," Camilla said, the distinct, sharp sound of a laptop flipping open echoing clearly in the background. "The initial stolen funds are burning out significantly faster than his beautiful little spreadsheet predicted. He needs fresh capital immediately to keep his new investors from walking away from the table. We are dropping the absolute hammer right now." Camilla worked aggressively through the entire night. First thing the very next morning, she marched directly into the county courthouse and filed an aggressive, emergency ex parte motion to completely freeze the pending title transaction, effectively blocking the bank from releasing a single cent. She did not stop there. Using my meticulously maintained daily logs, the stamped pediatrician's notes, confirming his complete absence, and the undeniable, documented proof of his attempted secondary real estate fraud, she officially filed the petition for temporary, exclusive use and possession of the duplex. She heavily cited the absolute, undeniable necessity of maintaining a secure, financially stable, and unthreatened environment for two vulnerable premature infants. By late Thursday afternoon, Camilla called me back with the final, glorious update. The presiding family court judge, entirely appalled by the legally documented timeline of the forged digital signatures and the subsequent, brazen attempt to siphon even more equity from a nursing mother, did not just grant our emergency freezing orders. The judge took one look at the overwhelming mountain of paper evidence and moved our preliminary custody and financial hearing date up by an entire calendar month. I walked over to the paper calendar hanging on the kitchen wall and stared at the current date. Nolan's return flight from his luxurious, spiritual desert retreat was scheduled to land in exactly 48 hours. He had confidently booked his expensive ticket, believing he was coming home to a financially broken, thoroughly exhausted woman who would hysterically cry and then sign whatever papers he demanded just to keep the fragile peace. He had absolutely no idea that the locks were permanently changed. His money supply was entirely blocked, and a furious family court judge was already waiting for him. He was about to confidently step off that airplane and walk completely blind into a loaded, perfectly calibrated trap on a chessboard he no longer had any power to control. The notification chime from the newly installed front porch camera pinged softly on my cellular phone at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon. I was standing in the kitchen, wiping down the already spotless granite island with a damp microfiber cloth. I looked down at the glowing screen. Nolan was standing on the front welcome mat. He looked exactly like a man returning from a luxurious corporate retreat, not a father who had abandoned his premature infants. His skin held a fresh, golden desert tan. He wore a crisp, light linen shirt, and an expensive leather travel bag was slung casually over his right shoulder. In his left hand, he held a small, beautifully decorated boutique gift bag. He reached out and confidently gripped the front door handle. He tried to turn it. The heavy digital lock held firm. A look of mild, patronizing confusion washed over his face. He pulled a brass key from his pocket and tried to slide it into a keyhole that no longer existed. Finally, he pressed the glowing doorbell button. I did not rush. I walked slowly to the front door, smoothed the front of my neatly ironed navy blue button-down shirt, and pulled the heavy door open. He had prepared a very specific facial expression for this exact moment. It was a perfectly rehearsed, gentle smile of a man who firmly believed that a soft, deep voice and a token apology would grant him immediate re-entry into his old life. He fully expected the door to swing open to reveal a weeping, haggard, desperate woman wearing stained sweatpants, clinging to his legs and begging for his help. Instead, he found me standing perfectly straight. My eyes were heavily circled with dark shadows from the night feeds, but they were wide, alert, and entirely devoid of tears. Behind me, the house was immaculate. The persistent scent of sour milk was gone, replaced by the faint smell of lemon surface cleaner. From the living room, the rhythmic, steady hum of the dual bassinet white noise machine signaled that both babies were sleeping in perfect unison. "Alyssa," he said, his voice dropping an octave into a soothing, artificial register. "You look tired. I am here now. Can we please sit down and talk this through like adults?" I stepped back wordlessly, leaving the door wide open for him to enter. He stepped over the threshold, his eyes darting around the hallway, taking in the unfamiliar digital lock and the missing clutter. He walked into the kitchen and set his leather bag on the floor. He placed the boutique gift bag onto the island. "I brought you some artisanal bath salts from Santa Fe," he murmured, attempting to catch my eye. "I know the last few weeks have been incredibly overwhelming for you. I just needed to clear my head so I could be the partner you truly deserve." I did not touch the gift bag. I simply stood on the opposite side of the granite island, resting both of my hands flat on the cool stone, sensing the impenetrable wall of my silence. Nolan shifted to his secondary tactic. He opened the side zipper of his leather bag and pulled out a thin, unmarked manila folder. He laid it casually on the counter. "Since I am back, I want to take the administrative burden entirely off your plate," he continued, his tone light and breezy. "I have some routine insurance renewals and basic property tax updates we need to file before the end of the month. If you just sign right here at the bottom, I will run them down to the post office this afternoon." He slid a small stack of papers across the granite. I looked down at them. Tucked perfectly between a generic home insurance declaration and a municipal tax form was a single sheet of heavy bond paper. It was a formal title correction document. It was the exact legal instrument the escrow company needed to authorize the secondary loan disbursement and funnel thousands of additional dollars into his new corporate entity. He was trying to slip a financial death warrant into a stack of junk mail. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse him of being a monster. I simply reached under the kitchen counter and pulled out the thick, legally bound dossier that Camilla Dane had delivered by courier that morning. I placed my hand firmly over his deceitful stack of papers, pushed them completely aside, and slid Camilla's heavy document file directly into the center of the island. Nolan looked down at the bold legal letterhead. He frowned, the patronizing smile faltering slightly. He opened the cover flap and began to read the top page. It was the official notice of the expedited family court hearing. Beneath that was the formal request for emergency temporary spousal and child support. And directly beneath that was the heavy court-mandated injunction completely freezing the title of the duplex, effectively barring him from extracting a single penny from the property until the judge reviewed the case. I watched the exact physical moment his carefully constructed reality completely shattered. It took roughly 4 seconds. In the first second, his eyes scanned the name Camilla Dane. In the second second, he saw the formal legal block on the real estate title. In the third second, his gaze locked onto a printed exhibit page bearing the exact name of his hidden limited liability company, Juniper Hollow Ventures, alongside a glaring red highlight over his forged digital signature. By the fourth second, he was entirely paralyzed. The gentle, apologetic husband mask violently dissolved. The warm brown of his eyes turned completely flat and black. The soft lines around his mouth tightened into a vicious, ugly sneer. He realized, with crushing clarity, that I knew everything. He immediately pivoted through 3 distinct, highly predictable defensive maneuvers. First, he attempted the vague, generalized apology. "Alyssa, you are completely misunderstanding the financial strategy here. I am sorry you felt so left in the dark. But business moves extremely fast." I maintained absolute eye contact and did not say a single word, failing to elicit a sympathetic response. He rapidly escalated to aggressive anger, playing the victim of a grand betrayal. "You went behind my back and hired a vicious attack dog lawyer while I was away trying to process my own mental health crisis. You were sitting here plotting to destroy me. How could you be so incredibly vindictive?" The silence in the kitchen remained heavy, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. I refused to give him the explosive argument he desperately needed to justify his actions. Finally, he deployed his last desperate tactic. He attempted to gaslight the very fabric of reality. Everything I did, every single dollar I moved, was to build a massive financial empire for this family. I took a calculated risk to secure our children a wealthy future. And you are entirely ruining it with your paranoid, small-minded paperwork. He slammed his hand down on the granite countertop, the sharp sound echoing loudly through the first floor. But the anger was a thin veil masking a much deeper, rising panic. He flipped to the very last page of the legal dossier, reading the attached communication from the commercial bank. That was the killing blow. The document explicitly stated that the bank's fraud department had officially suspended his upcoming loan disbursement. The money he desperately needed to finalize his venture capital term sheet was completely frozen. He had absolutely no time left to coax me, manipulate me, or wear me down. His vanity project out in the real world was currently bleeding thousands of dollars an hour, and I had just aggressively clamped down on his only oxygen hose. He snatched his leather bag off the floor. His chest was heaving with furious, shallow breaths. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "You have absolutely no idea what kind of catastrophic mess you have just created," he hissed, the venom dripping from every single syllable. "You think you won a minor battle because you hired a loud lawyer. You will drop these ridiculous injunctions by tomorrow morning, or I promise you, I will make sure you walk away from this marriage with absolutely nothing." He spun on his heel, marched out the front door, and let it slam violently shut behind him. The heavy thud shook the framed pictures on the hallway wall. I stood perfectly still in the quiet kitchen. He had stormed out believing he was still the most powerful person in the room. He genuinely thought his aggressive threats would force me into a panicked submission overnight. He firmly believed he still possessed the leverage to turn the situation around. But as I calmly picked up his fake administrative papers and dropped them directly into the stainless steel trash can, the truth was glaringly obvious. He was not a commanding general demanding surrender. He was a man walking blindly into quicksand, and he had just taken his very first step into the deep. Nolan realized almost immediately that the exhausted, easily manipulated woman he had abandoned no longer existed. Unable to control me physically or financially, he rapidly pivoted his strategy to controlling the public narrative surrounding me. The dirty war began less than 48 hours after he stormed out of my kitchen. He executed a highly coordinated, multi-pronged attack on my reputation, hoping to isolate me from any potential support system. He sent long, carefully crafted text messages to our extended relatives, our mutual acquaintances, the couples we used to share a pew with at our local church, and even a few of my former corporate colleagues. He painted a tragic, deeply sympathetic portrait of himself. He cast himself as a desperate, exhausted man trying to save his family from a wife suffering from severe postpartum instability. He claimed my mind was currently unhinged by hormonal imbalances and paranoid delusions. He told everyone that I was aggressively isolating the children and that he had only stepped away temporarily to de-escalate my manic episodes. He desperately needed visual proof to back up this fictional narrative of the wounded, healing father. He needed content for his audience. On a Tuesday afternoon, my phone lit up with a new message from him. He did not ask how the babies were sleeping, nor did he ask if their recent fevers had completely resolved. He asked for a brief, 10-minute visit. "I just want to come by and take a quick photograph with my kids." The text message read, "Just to show everyone, we are working through this and moving forward." He wanted a digital prop. He wanted an image of himself holding 2 infants to post on his social media accounts, hoping to actively manipulate the court of public opinion and eventually show a family judge that he was actively trying to bond with his children. I did not engage in a bitter argument. I typed a single, cold sentence denying his request outside of a formally supervised, court-mandated visitation schedule. Then, I took a high-resolution screenshot of his ridiculous request, printed it on thick paper, and snapped it into the heavy black binder. His official legal response to our initial filings arrived by courier later that week. Sitting in Camilla Dane's sleek downtown office, I read through the dense paragraphs his expensive defense attorney had drafted. Nolan did not deny draining our joint savings accounts. Instead, he attempted to sanitize his financial betrayal by wrapping it in slick, sterile corporate jargon. He formally categorized the tens of thousands of dollars he had secretly funneled out of our home as a strategic investment for the family's long-term future. He actually put it in writing, under penalty of perjury. that abandoning his wife and newborns without money to launch a men's wellness brand was a responsible act of long-term family planning. It was nauseating. But it was also a massive tactical error. Camila did not laugh at his absurd defense. She simply sharpened her knives. She launched a relentless, suffocating blizzard of legal subpoenas. She did not just attack one front, she hit him from every conceivable angle simultaneously, completely overwhelming his defense attorney. She legally compelled the production of his personal credit card statements, the founding articles of Organization for Juniper Hollow Ventures, every single flight itinerary from the past 6 months, his direct email correspondence with potential angel investors, and the raw, unfiltered system access logs from the Human Resources Department at Northgate Benefit Systems. We were systematically dismantling his carefully curated life, document by document. When the secure server logs from my employer finally arrived, they provided the exact, indisputable killing blow we needed for the fraud affidavit. Jonah Pike had delivered perfectly. The raw digital data confirmed, without a shadow of a doubt, that the forged return to work form was submitted from a specific Internet Protocol address. It matched the unique hardware signature of Nolan's personal laptop exactly. More importantly, the system stamped the exact time of the fraudulent submission at 1:12 in the morning. Camila highlighted that specific line in bright yellow ink. We cross-referenced it with my hospital admission records. At 1:12 in the morning on that specific date, I was strapped tightly to an electronic fetal monitor, heavily medicated with magnesium sulfate to stop my premature contractions. The data proved malicious, calculated fraud beyond any reasonable doubt. But the most devastating discovery did not come from the hospital records. It emerged from a massive stack of financial statements. Camilla's forensic accountant noticed a glaring, catastrophic anomaly in how Nolan funded his luxurious desert retreat. He had not just drained my savings. He had actively used a corporate credit card issued by his current employer, Veldon Brand House. He had brazenly categorized the expensive short-term loft rental, the high-end biodynamic wine, and the lavish restaurant meals as legitimate client entertainment expenses. He assumed that because he was a senior executive, the accounting department would simply rubber stamp the charges without a second glance. He had crossed a massive, terrifying line. He had taken our deeply personal domestic dispute and transformed it into a genuine, highly actionable case of corporate embezzlement. As the legal net aggressively tightened, the collateral damage began to severely impact his new venture. Trevor Hale, the primary financial architect and his core business partner for Juniper Hollow Ventures, is a man who strictly deals in clean assets and zero liabilities. Through the dense network of corporate finance, Trevor caught wind of the severe legal flag attached to the duplex. He realized the foundational collateral for their entire startup was entirely locked in a vicious, highly contested family court dispute. Trevor immediately stopped answering Nolan's phone calls. He canceled their scheduled strategy meetings. He sent a formal email demanding an immediate, comprehensive review of every single mortgage document and a legally binding guarantee that the initial seed money was actually free and clear. The massive financial empire Nolan claimed to be building for our future was currently bleeding money from every single artery, and his investors were sprinting toward the exit doors. Through all of his frantic, loud flailing, I maintained absolute, terrifying silence. I did not post a single cryptic quote on social media. I did not publish a tragic status update detailing my exhaustion. I did not text our mutual friends to vigorously defend my reputation against his ridiculous claims of postpartum insanity. I refused to give him an opponent to fight in the public square. My utter lack of a public reaction drove him completely mad. He was boxing shadows, desperately trying to provoke an emotional response that he could use as evidence of my instability. He wanted me to scream so he could call me crazy. He wanted me to beg so he could call me weak. But because I remained completely silent, the only voice echoing in the room was his own. My documented silence became an impenetrable fortress. Every single lie he told to our friends, every pathetic excuse his lawyer fabricated in the legal filings, and every aggressive text message he sent demanding my submission simply became another documented rope. I was not trapping him. My silence simply gave him all the room he needed to tighten the case against himself. The heavy oak doors of the family court precinct swung open at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. I sat perfectly still beside Camilla at the petitioner's table, wearing a structured charcoal gray suit that felt like impenetrable armor. Nolan walked down the center aisle, and the sheer audacity of his visual presentation almost made me scoff out loud. He had meticulously stripped away the glowing, tanned, desert retreat aura he had projected just a few days prior. Today, he wore a somber, dark navy blazer that looked slightly rumpled. His shoulders were dramatically slumped forward, the dark circles under his eyes, which I heavily suspected were enhanced by a clever, deliberate application of cosmetic shadow, were displayed prominently to solicit maximum judicial pity. But the absolute most grotesque detail was his left hand. Resting gently on his leather legal portfolio was his gold wedding band, polished and reinstated on his ring finger. He was fully committed to playing the role of the devoted, exhausted patriarch who had simply stumbled one single time under the crushing weight of modern fatherhood. When his legal counsel called him to speak, Nolan delivered a masterclass in calibrated vulnerability. He addressed the honorable judge with a trembling, deeply respectful cadence. "Your Honor, I never intended to abandon my wife or my newborn children," Nolan stated, pressing his right hand firmly against his chest. The sheer, overwhelming pressure of the sudden premature birth, coupled with the absolute necessity of securing our family's long-term financial stability, simply broke me temporarily. I stepped away because I was suffering a severe mental health crisis brought on by extreme fatigue. Everything I did, every single financial maneuver I executed, was a desperate, misguided attempt to build a massive, generational wealth foundation for my family through my independent venture. I am just a man who became profoundly overloaded by the desire to provide a better life. He sounded incredibly convincing. If I had not lived through the sheer terror of his calculated departure, I might have actually believed the tragic narrative of a well-meaning father drowning in the deep end of his responsibilities. Camilla Dane did not sigh. She did not roll her eyes. She did not attack his character with emotional outbursts, theatrical indignation, or loud accusations of betrayal. When it was her turn to present our case, she stood up, buttoned her sharp black blazer, and approached the bench with a thick, heavy stack of indexed, chronologically ordered exhibits. She utilized the cold, unforgiving reality of a forensic timeline. "Your Honor, the respondent is claiming a temporary lapse in judgment brought on by the sudden stress of a premature birth," Camilla began, her voice ringing out through the quiet room like struck iron. Let us review the exact, documented timeline of this alleged panic. Camilla laid down the first exhibit folder. 3 weeks prior to the premature birth of the twins, while the petitioner was completely unaware and maintaining a healthy pregnancy, the respondent drafted a highly detailed financial exit strategy spreadsheet, meticulously budgeting for a luxury desert vacation. She laid down the second exhibit folder. On the exact night the petitioner was admitted to the hospital triage ward in threatened preterm labor, the respondent did not rush to her bedside to offer comfort. Instead, at 1:12 in the morning, from his personal laptop. He submitted a forged electronic document to her corporate employer, fraudulently terminating her paid maternity leave to ensure her financial dependency. She laid down the third exhibit folder. 2 days later, still while the petitioner was hospitalized and heavily medicated, he digitally forged her signature to extract a massive, six-figure equity loan against her separately inherited property, transferring the stolen funds into a hidden limited liability company. She laid down the fourth and final exhibit in that sequence. And while the petitioner was completely destitute, rationing specialized baby formula and recovering from major abdominal surgery alone, the respondent was posting public digital updates about his luxurious spiritual retreat. The large courtroom was incredibly silent. The judge, an older woman with sharp, deeply discerning eyes, stared down at the documents over the thin rim of her reading glasses. The atmosphere shifted drastically. Nolan's defense attorney shifted uncomfortably in his plush leather chair, suddenly realizing the massive crater in his client's defense. But Camilla was not finished. She pulled out the intercepted digital correspondence between Nolan and his older brother. If there is any lingering, residual doubt regarding the respondent's true, calculated intent, Your Honor, I direct your specific attention to Exhibit 17. Camilla said calmly, an electronic message sent by the respondent exactly 5 days before the premature delivery. Camilla read the exact words aloud, her articulation perfectly crisp and completely devoid of emotion. I just need 6 weeks of quiet before the funding round officially closes. After that, she will be totally out of options. She will have to sign whatever I put in front of her. The oxygen seemed to instantly vanish from the large room. The words hung heavily in the sterile air, utterly devastating in their sheer cruelty. It was the absolute, undeniable crystallization of his malice. Every single person in that courtroom realized simultaneously that Nolan was not a passive victim of marital stress. He was a financial predator. His entire elaborate scheme only failed because I did not shatter exactly the way his spreadsheet had calculated. The judge did not deliberate for long. Her ruling was swift, decisive, and surgically precise. She completely stripped Nolan of any immediate legal or financial leverage. I was immediately granted temporary primary physical and legal custody of both children. The judge ordered a steep, mandatory monthly spousal and child support garnishment directly from whatever remaining corporate salary Nolan possessed. Furthermore, she granted me the exclusive, uninterrupted use and possession of the duplex throughout the entire duration of the legal proceedings, strictly barring him from stepping foot on the premises. Most terrifyingly for Nolan, the judge fully authorized our formal request for a comprehensive forensic accounting review of his new corporate entity, Juniper Hollow Ventures, granting our investigators the power to track every single stolen dollar across his business accounts. When the bailiff officially dismissed the court, Nolan did not look defeated. As he marched out of the heavy double doors into the bright hallway, his jaw was clenched tight, and the veins in his neck were visibly pulsing. He was not scared of the judicial reprimand. He was intensely, viciously angry, in his deeply narcissistic reality. This was merely the first chaotic round of a long negotiation. He still firmly believed he could outsmart the judicial system, and more importantly, he arrogantly believed he could still manipulate me outside the formal confines of a courtroom. At exactly 8 o'clock that evening, while I was carefully organizing the sterilized feeding bottles on the kitchen counter, my phone illuminated with a new text message from him. It was a lengthy, carefully worded proposition masquerading as a civilized, mature compromise. Alyssa, today was completely unnecessary and needlessly brutal. The digital message read, We do not need to let these aggressive lawyers destroy everything we built. If you formally withdraw the fraud allegations regarding the house loan and stop this ridiculous forensic audit into my company, I will guarantee you a massive, generous percentage of the profits the moment my new company closes its next capital funding round. Let us be smart about this. Drop the absolute hostility, and we can both walk away wealthy. We can settle this quietly. He was actively trying to buy his way out of a severe federal fraud charge with imaginary venture capital money. He wanted me to trade my airtight legal protection for a useless, unenforceable corporate promise. He was bargaining from a position of profound weakness, disguised as benevolence. I did not even consider his absurd offer for a single second. I completely declined the proposition in my mind, but I did not type a response. I did not need to waste my energy. Less than 10 minutes prior to his text message arriving, Camila had forwarded me a highly encrypted audio file. It was the final, devastating puzzle piece she had successfully subpoenaed from the digital communication records of Trevor Hale, Nolan's increasingly panicked business partner. It was a recorded voice memo Nolan had casually sent to Trevor while standing in the airport departure terminal on the exact night he abandoned us. I pressed the play icon on my screen. Nolan's recorded voice was bright, energetic, and completely devoid of any sorrow or hesitation. He let out a sharp, deeply amused laugh before speaking into his device. "Do not worry about the domestic situation, man." Nolan's confident voice echoed clearly through my quiet kitchen. "The equity cash is fully secured and routing to our corporate account right now." The babies came at the wrong time for what I was building, so I had to change course. She will cry for a few weeks, but she will manage fine. Let us just focus entirely on the investor pitch. I listened to his callous, arrogant laughter one more time. The babies just showed up at the wrong time for his dream. I locked my phone screen and set the device gently on the cool granite counter. I did not feel a single shred of lingering pity, anger, or sadness for the man I used to love. I simply smiled. A cold, hard, completely triumphant expression in the dim light of my secure home. I was going to let the forensic accountants completely burn his entire dream to the ground. Several months dragged by, transforming the stifling, oppressive heat of the summer into the crisp, bitter cold of late November. The final, comprehensive trial regarding our assets and permanent custody was scheduled for the third Tuesday of the month. The timing of this court date was an act of poetic, devastating justice. Through the mandatory legal disclosures, Camilla Dane had discovered that this was the precise week Nolan was projected to officially sign the multi-million-dollar venture capital term sheet for his startup. It was also the exact week his current corporate employer, Veldon Brandhouse, was conducting their annual internal financial audits. We sat in the cavernous, wood-paneled courtroom. Nolan wore a sharp, custom-tailored charcoal suit, clearly intending to project the image of a highly successful, stable entrepreneur on the verge of a massive financial victory. He still believed his inherent, practiced charm could easily overpower cold, hard data. Camila did not argue with his attorney. She simply presented the math. She called our hired forensic accountant to the witness stand. For 2 agonizingly precise hours, the accountant detailed every single fraudulent maneuver. He tracked the stolen marital funds down to the very last penny. He presented the undeniable digital trail proving Nolan had intentionally forged my electronic signature to secure the massive home equity line of credit. Furthermore, the accountant demonstrated exactly how Nolan had manipulated the human resources portal to cancel my paid maternity leave. The judge's expression hardened into a mask of pure judicial disgust as she realized the true depth of his calculated financial abuse. He had deliberately tried to starve me into absolute submission to force my hand. Next, Camilla submitted the official sworn statements from the county land records director. The documentation proved the duplex was my protected, premarital inherited property, because the bank loan was secured through documented digital forgery without my legal consent. The entire financial foundation of Juniper Hollow Ventures was instantly classified as a toxic, highly contested liability. Then came the fatal strike. Camila opened a sealed manila envelope and submitted a formal notarized affidavit directly from the chief compliance officer at Veldon Brand House. My meticulous documentation of his social media posts, cross-referenced with his corporate expense reports, had successfully triggered an aggressive internal investigation at his firm. The affidavit confirmed that Nolan had grossly misused corporate client hospitality funds to finance his luxurious desert retreat, falsified the primary business purpose of his travel, and actively concealed a massive conflict of interest regarding his outside startup. The respondent's employment contract was terminated for severe misconduct, effective immediately. As of 9 o'clock this morning, Camilla read clearly from the final page of the affidavit. Nolan's defense attorney desperately tried to interject, arguing that the startup company's pending capital injection would easily cover all marital debts within the month. Camilla casually slid a single printed email across the heavy wooden table. It was a formal communication from Trevor Hale, representing the entire angel investor syndicate, having been legally notified of the property dispute and the impending federal fraud investigation regarding the foundational loan. The investors were permanently withdrawing their financial commitments. They were legally severing all ties. Juniper Hollow Ventures was entirely dead before it even printed its very first product label. The presiding judge did not waste time with a lengthy emotional lecture. She delivered her ruling with calm, devastating finality. She awarded me total, undisputed legal control and sole ownership of the duplex. She ordered Nolan to fully reimburse my exorbitant legal fees, which totaled over $75,000, to compensate for the marital assets he had maliciously dissipated. The judge awarded me 100% of his remaining retirement accounts. Finally, regarding the children he had treated as a disposable inconvenience, she stripped him of all physical custody. He was granted strictly supervised visitation for exactly 4 hours per week at a monitored county facility, entirely at his own personal expense. Before he could even petition the court for standard, unsupervised visitation rights. The concept of a collapsed world is rarely allowed. Explosive event. It usually happens in terrifying, rapid silence, when the bailiff officially dismissed the court. Nolan practically sprinted out of the heavy double doors into the brightly lit corridor. I followed at a slow, measured pace alongside Camila. As we walked into the hallway, Nolan was staring down at his cellular phone. The screen was lighting up with a relentless, frantic barrage of notifications. I watched him answer the first incoming call. It was the commercial bank. The fraud department had officially recalled the fraudulent home equity loan, demanding immediate, total repayment of the massive 6-figure sum. His face drained of all color, turning a sickly, hollow shade of gray. He hung up, and his phone immediately rang a second time. It was Trevor Hale. Trevor was shouting loud enough that I could clearly hear his tinny, furious voice echoing in the quiet hallway, officially dissolving their partnership and threatening further civil litigation. Before Nolan could even lower the device from his ear, a third call arrived. It was the human resources director from his former employer. confirming his termination and demanding the return of all corporate property by 5 o'clock that afternoon. He stood entirely frozen in the middle of the polished marble floor. The massive, fraudulent empire he had spent months meticulously building had completely evaporated in the span of a single Tuesday afternoon. He had absolutely no job, no venture capital funding, no startup company, a mountain of rapidly compounding legal debt, and a severely restricted path to ever seeing his own children again. He looked up from his phone, his eyes wild and completely hollow, searching the long hallway until his gaze locked directly onto mine. He opened his mouth, perhaps to beg for mercy, perhaps to threaten me one last time. But no sound came out. I did not stop walking. I did not offer him a single word of pity, nor did I stop to gloat over his ruin. I simply kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, walking right past the shattered, pathetic remains of his life, and pushed through the heavy glass exit doors into the crisp autumn air. I walked down the concrete steps and across the paved parking lot to my vehicle. I opened the rear doors and carefully buckled my two healthy, thriving children into their padded safety seats. I adjusted their warm blankets, kissed their soft foreheads, and closed the heavy metal doors. I slid into the driver's seat, gripped the smooth leather steering wheel, and let out a long, deep breath. The crushing weight that had sat heavily on my chest for nearly a year was completely gone. As I pulled out of the courthouse parking lot, I finally understood the absolute truth about survival. The greatest, most devastating revenge was never about shouting, fighting, or actively trying to cause him pain. True revenge was simply standing completely upright, refusing to break, and calmly watching as every single lie he built upon my back violently collapsed under its own rotting weight. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you are listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts together. Do not forget to subscribe to the Olivia Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support us even more by hitting the hype button so that the story in this video can be heard by many more people.